Welcome back to another edition of Carroll's Cadence. I'm your host, Brandon Carroll, and I'm sorry I missed y'all on Wednesday. I was given a rare off day during the season, and I took the opportunity to fully disengage from work, both on the allgators.com front and with the show. This is an industry where it can swallow you alive if you don't take those necessary days when they kind of present themselves. And I saw the opportunity arise and I took it. And really, I have no regrets. So it was a refreshing day for me, but I'm glad to be back here on your TV, tablet, television, whatever you watch me on. I'm glad to be back on the screen. But you couldn't hold me away from this grind too long, baby. This is exactly what we're doing here at Carroll's Cadence. We're grinding. We keep grinding, ready to bring y'all a preview and prediction show for the Florida Gators Week 4 matchup against the Charlotte 49ers. And as always, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And once you've done both of those things, sit back, relax, and keep your ears open because you might learn something. Yeah, man. Here I go. We got a lot of energy today, as you can tell from that intro. But let's get this thing moving. Let's start with a brief overview of Florida's opposition this weekend, coming in at 1-2 on the year, the Charlotte 49ers. And as you guys have become accustomed to since I started this channel, is I'm going to lay it down for you each and every week with a scouting report of Florida's competition. Last week, it came in its own channel or its own show episode with Evan Kroll breaking down Tennessee with me last week on Wednesday. But this week, obviously, we didn't have a Wednesday show, so it's going to be a segment on today's preview and prediction show. Now, before I dive into the 49ers scheme and approach, I just want to say this is not your average American Athletic Conference roster. This is a new coaching staff in Charlotte that's done a fantastic job, a tremendous job reconstructing this unit to make it be able to compete, maybe not this year, but moving forward in the AAC. They brought in several key contributors, former Power 5 players who ended up on the open market, on the transfer market for one reason or another, but found their way to Charlotte under Biff Poggi. And I think the biggest thing with this team is that it's a highly talented squad filled with some elite level athletes. There are some dudes on this team that were once thought of to be like that. At one point, there are a few dudes on this team that there are guys saying he's him because they got a few hims, as Deion Sanders likes to say. And if you see one of them boys make a play, just know that's why. They got some talent on this 49ers squad. It hasn't necessarily brought the results that they've looked for early on, but it's there. It has the ability to make a splash week in and week out. And the offense specifically is a relatively balanced approach. They have slightly leaned more towards the run than they are going to moving forward. I think it's kind of shifting that way as of late because of the two quarterback system that they're using. It's been a 58-42 split in favor of the ground game. It's probably closer to a 55-45 from a true play calling standpoint. They do look to use the run, play hard-nosed football, physical football, and to establish the air attack. But the improvisation, I should say, from the quarterback spot has kind of made it a more slanted split than it necessarily is. But they're still a run-first team. They utilize a two-quarterback system with Trexler Ivy starting to take over as the team's main passer, while Jalen Jones occupies more of the rushing role with the heavy dose of his carries coming from read option looks. And yes, it's the same Jalen Jones who signed to Florida under Dan Mullen in that 2018 class, I believe. He was on campus for about as long as a hiccup before departing after off-field controversy emerged. He spent time at Jackson State, Bethune-Cookman, before winding up at Charlotte this offseason, reuniting with his former high school coach at St. Francis Academy in Biff Poggi, who I might add is an absolute legend. Bro's going to pull up to the Swamp wearing a cutoff t-shirt that says Charlotte football across the chest. He's going to have the V's going to be cut down. He doesn't look like your average head coach. He's built to be an offensive line coach. He played offensive line at Pittsburgh in the 70s. But let me just say, he's going to go out there. He's probably going to get beat by 30 plus, and it's going to be tough for Charlotte on Saturday. But he's going to give you the most elite, electric 8-minute media session that you've ever seen in your life afterward. And he's just going to be rocking that cutoff the entire time. Bet that. Biff Poggi, friend of the show. Not actually, but maybe one day. Maybe one day we can get Biff on the show to chop it up with you, boy. Shout out Locked On Gators host Brandon Olson, who actually did get Biff on his show, as I watched earlier. That's electric. That is Biff is an enigma. We love Biff, and we're excited to see how he can really shape this Charlotte program moving forward. But anyways, the 49ers like to operate out of an RPO system when Jones specifically, Jalen Jones, is the one behind center. Stress defenses with having to honor the quarterback run. It's worked to some degree in this season so far, and it's very evident that the entire offense feels better rushing the football. Specifically up front, the offensive line's been shaky in pass protection, but they've been a bit better against, when they're having to run block. And mainly it's been Jones leading the pack in that rushing game. He is 196 yards on the season, 6.1 yards per carry. And as a result, I expect this unit to run the ball consistently against Florida on Saturday. This is going to be two teams that, and I've said it before, that want to do things very similarly. They want to run the football. They want to establish the ground game to then open up the pass. Obviously, Charlotte might not be able to do it at an effective clip as the way Florida is able to, but it doesn't mean they're not going to try. That's exactly what they're going to do on Saturday, and I expect them to lean in heavily to it. Florida's defense has improved in each contest this year, especially from a pass rushing standpoint, which is why I think they're going to lean into that. I don't think Poggi will want to give them the opportunity to kind of get after whichever guy is at the helm. That unit's given up 9 sacks so far this season through 3 games. And we know Austin Armstrong is going to throw different looks in there. They're going to play aggressive. And that's really been his MO since he arrived at Florida, and it's been working. They're the number 10 overall total defense in college football right now. And it shows in the way that they mix up looks per opponent. Last week, we saw light boxes with 5 to 6 guys moving in against Tennessee. Obviously, Tennessee likes to spread it out, play outside the numbers, use all 53.5 yards to their advantage. Charlotte's more of a condensed offense, so you're going to get more loading the box, very different, and with man coverage outside from the Gators this week. I expect one high with Jordan Castell and Miguel Mitchell kind of playing down into the box from Florida's safety unit to combat the rushing attack of Charlotte, and potentially a QB spy, probably Scooby Williams playing in that role for Florida this week. Defensively, the 49ers look to use its defense as the backbone of the squad. They want to play defense first, use their defense to put them in good field position, to create turnovers, to really create points in any way they can, especially early on in this program's turnover from the previous coaching staff. It's a multiple front unit that actually does a good job of throwing different looks at quarterbacks that, pre-snap, that they'll then move into a different look upon the snap. They notably fooled Maryland quarterback Taulia Tagovailoa in week 2 as they came out in what looked to be a man coverage, man look. Before dropping into zone, they had the linebacker head up on a tight end that was running a seam. It looked as if he was going to get carried up the field and in man with that tight end, but he broke out into the flat. And as a result, it was kind of like a cover 3 variant, although the play didn't develop that fast because Tagovailoa was looking to just get the ball outside the numbers quickly to a curl to the boundary wideout. It didn't have too much time to develop, but it looked as if it was a cover 3 variant look. And linebacker Demetrius Knight, who was that guy that was supposed to be lining straight up with that tight end, breaks out to the flat, which was his zone, saw the quarterback's eyes, read him perfectly, jumped the route, and was able to take it home for 6. It put Charlotte up 14-0. And Knight, specifically, who's been one of the best defenders for Charlotte this year, is one of those Power 5 transfers I mentioned earlier that are kind of leading this Charlotte team into the future. He started his career at Georgia Tech, where he played for 4 years, and then moved to the Queen City this season. And he had the opportunity to kind of give them that extra juice against the Terrapins to go up 14-0 on them. But unfortunately, that's where the unit peaked. That's where the unit hit their height so far this season. They ended up losing to Maryland. Maryland came back and were able to knock them off after, or I don't want to say knock them off because Maryland was expected to win, but going down 14-0 in the first quarter is definitely a hill to climb. They climbed it with relative ease, and since then it's been a mess for Charlotte to clean up. They fallen victim to being gashed by the run, blown coverages against the pass, and really everything in between. They're just trying to get back on track, but they keep having to go and play these Power 5, very talented groups. They struggled last week against Georgia State, and it's just been tough sledding for this team in year one under Poggi, and I don't think that changes anytime soon. I think they continue to struggle throughout the rest of this season. They were picked last in the AAC, which initially Biff took pretty hard. He only got 3 questions during AAC's media day. Let the media know that was he did not like that. That was disrespectful in his eyes, which it probably, I understand why. I understand you've prepared, you've taken the time to go speak with media, and they got 3 questions for you. All right, well, we'll see what we can do. Obviously, they haven't been able to amount to much this season, but that could change as they go throughout the rest of the year, especially with the talent, the aforementioned talent that they have on this roster. They're experiencing that difficulty that is a coaching transition. And they're a prime example of getting worse before it gets better. And if we're keeping it a buck, which you know we do here on Carroll's Cadence, this game should look very similar to the performance Florida produced against McNeese State 2 weeks ago. It should be a blowout. And there's really no other way to put it. Now, I don't necessarily think it is a Florida scoring on their first 7 possessions of the game, scoring touchdowns, just absolutely controlling the ball, having no impediment to what they're able to do offensively or defensively. I don't think it's the same in terms of the beatdown they laid on the Cowboys, but I do think they make their mark against a Charlotte team that's still trying to find its footing this year, and that's just really it's struggling to kind of mold together in year one. And with that being said, I think we'll see the 27.5 point spread that SI Sportsbook has put out. Yes, I'm a corporate man. Throw stones at me if you will. But I think that should be covered by Florida this week, which I'll get into my exact prediction in a few. But this one really shouldn't be close. Florida should at least win this one by 4 touchdowns. At least. They should just do so handedly. And so as a result, as a byproduct of that reality, I'm not necessarily going to sit here and give you some keys to victory or areas to, watch to ensure a Florida win, because that'd be a waste of time for me and for y'all, because Florida should win. And if they don't, there are some serious, serious problems going on in Gainesville right after a monumental victory over Tennessee that's kind of reinstilled some optimism into the fan base for what this season should look like in year 2 under Billy Napier. So instead, I'm going to give you all 3 points. I know I love the points. I love structure in these shows. 3 points of emphasis to watch beyond the scoreboard on Saturday night. Things that will translate from opponent to opponent and can really give Florida a sense of success beyond just winning this game. It's really 3 areas for each and every one of you, my beloved listeners, my beloved viewers. I love all of you, to hone in on during your viewing to understand what could make this contest another success, this tune-up contest a success for the Gators as they gear up to take a trip to Lexington, Kentucky next weekend. And the first one, number 1, is watching Florida's offensive line replacements. There's no Micah Mazuka, there's no Damian George, and there's no Kingsley Eguakun for Florida, at least for the first half, for the first 2, on Saturday night. Mazuka and George are serving suspensions for the first half for their actions in the late game altercation with Tennessee last Saturday. Obviously, both of them threw a punch. Dante Zanders is also out of action in that contest. And then Kingsley is out after aggravating the ankle that held him out of the first 2 contests of the season. I'm under the impression that it's not a lingering issue. It's not something that's going to carry beyond this contest. I view it more as a precautionary absence for Iguakin. I think that they're looking to keep him healthy for the SEC slate. They saw how important he is to this offensive line against Tennessee in the success that they were able to have. And as a result, they want him to get more time, give him more time to heal fully before they get into the thick of the SEC slate. But as a result of those three being out, there will be some different faces along the offensive line. Jake Slaughter obviously returns to the center spot he controlled in the first two contests in Kingsley's absence. True freshman Najee Harris will get his first start in orange and blue after being praised throughout the offseason for his contributions and his maturity as a freshman for Micah Mazuka, who normally controls that right guard spot. And then you'll have Lindell Hudson, the Gators swing guard so far this year, will get time at Georgia's right tackle position after failing to claim that starting role in the camp battle. And all three have contributed in a rather large role this year, this season, or at least in their college careers. Slaughter, like I mentioned earlier, started the first two games for Florida, struggled in his first out against Utah, but started to find that rhythm in week 2 against McNeese before obviously Kingsley Iguakin returned to the lineup in week 3 to bolster Florida's trenches even more. So his progression will be something to keep an eye on as the Gators look for him to eventually be the guy at the center spot, at least at this stage, with really no other piece there at the moment. You have Roderick Kearney, who's still far and away in need of development before he's ready to go to be that full-time starting center. And once Kingsley departs from the program, that is. So that could be as early as this offseason. So you're really going to have to watch how Slaughter performs yet again in that starting role, in that full-time, you're the guy, go out there and get it done role. But really, if we're being honest, for this season, it's the other two spots that are worth the watch. It's the other two spots that are worth the most attention if you're someone who likes to kind of zoom in on different positions and different things. Starting with Lindell Hudson out at right tackle. He lost the starting right tackle job, as I said, in this offseason, late in this offseason, after missing action with the concussion that he suffered due to a car accident. He'll get an opportunity to kind of prove himself at right tackle in this contest, potentially kind of reopening the discussion for a competition against George. Florida said that they've kind of made it a priority to maintain open competition when guys warrant it. And Lindell could be putting himself in a position to warrant that extra competition, that necessary back and forth between him and George with a solid performance, because George has been a little shaky. He's been a little shaky through 3 games. And so you have those two going at it with George being on the sideline, not able to perform. Lindell gets a full first half sample size of what he can do in live reps against a real opponent. Then finally, there's this year's plug. There's this year's guy. They've had it one each year. Florida's had a guy on the offensive line. It's one of the feathers in the cap of Florida offensive line coaches Rob Sale and Darnell Stapleton. Their ability to build depth behind the starting 5 through rotation. It's rare in college football to see the amount of rotation that Florida brings to the table up front. Because usually there's an argument that, we have to maintain cohesion with the group. We don't want there to be any other we don't want there to be any inconsistency with the chemistry and things like that. But there hasn't been much time for this unit to gain chemistry throughout the offseason. They have had to plug and play guys because of injury, this week because of suspension. There have been guys in and out of the lineup all offseason long, spring, summer, fall, doesn't matter. Florida's had to find ways to work other players into the first team unit. And they're doing so again this week. But because of Florida's approach, it potentially has the opportunity to pay dividends for them down the line and throughout the rest of this year. Sale and Stapleton develop depth better than really any offensive line coaches in the country because they are not afraid to keep that rotation of players going. They're not afraid to have players crack the lineup for reasons that aren't just injury or just in with the starting lineup to equip that talent with the game reps needed to expedite their growth. Last year, it was Austin Barber, who is really the golden trenchman for the team last year because he was being groomed for the big stage. He was being groomed for that left tackle spot once the players occupying the really because Florida had to replace 4 offensive linemen this year, but because Barber played so often, he was able to take Richard Garage's spot no problem. He was able to fill in and be fine. This year, it's Najee Harris, true freshman at IMG Academy. He's proven that he is their guy throughout camp and into the season. He's played in all 3 games so far, and he's really lived up to the billing as an immensely progressed rookie at this stage for the Florida offensive line. And it's not necessarily a shock because of the production hotbed in IMG Academy that he came from, but now he'll control the role in full-time against Charlotte, providing a high-volume look at his performance as a future pillar of Florida's offensive line, as a guy who will likely start and be the main piece for Florida next season. He's ready to go. He's given himself the ability to be injected in that starting lineup. Florida's offensive line coaches have given him that ability to go in and play in a larger role, and seeing how he performs in that with that added responsibility, that added weight on his shoulders, knowing that there's not Micah Mazuka who could come in and get him if he needs it. I think that's going to be something very important to watch for Florida throughout the rest of this year, because attrition is still very real, even though Florida hasn't necessarily dealt with it much in season. You're going to need those pieces throughout the rest of the year, especially as they get into SEC play and depth becomes a massive, massive commodity for teams to succeed. But he's not the only freshman who will take on a larger role on Saturday, which brings me to my next thing to watch for, and that's youth, the youth of Florida football in increased roles. Obviously, you have Najee Harris, but then you have guys like Treyon Webb, who saw a big role in Florida's win over McNeese State. You have Andy G and Aiden Mizell, who should see added time this week at wideout, with Eugene Wilson III not being able to go, and just trying to get guys similar to Harris ready for that spotlight for when depth becomes a serious need for Florida at any point in this season. And then defensively, you have TJ Searcy, Kelby Collins, Cam James, who have all performed pretty consistently throughout the first 3 weeks. They've all seen a good amount of time on Florida's defensive line on those edge spots for the Gators. So Gators has done a good job of rotating that defensive line in high frequency, keeping a lot of fresh legs, keeping a lot of wind with these guys, so that they're able to go and really wreak havoc in the backfield with consistency. Those 3 are going to still see potentially even more time, an added role if Florida is able to jump out to the lead that they're expected to against Charlotte on Saturday. But then you look at arguably the most important position for Florida to really build that depth this week, and it's in the secondary. You have Jakeem Jackson, Dijon Johnson, Sharif Denson, Bryce Thornton, who are all going to see added reps this week. Jackson has played in each of the 3 games as the 4th cornerback man in that rotation, in that secondary rotation for the boundary corner spot. Dijon Johnson had he arrived late, so he wasn't able to really get into the swing of things as quickly as Jakeem has this season, because he wasn't able to be there for the spring regimen for Florida. But he's still someone that they want to get going as the year goes on. Sharif Denson, who's kind of proving to be that backup star player for Florida behind Jaden Hill at the nickel cornerback spot. That's the star that I speak of. It's basically a hybrid position that forces players to have the skill set of a boundary cover corner while also producing as a rangy safety type, which is a very difficult position for anyone to play. It's proven to be very difficult for Florida to really get into over the past few years. Ever since Chauncey Gardner-Johnson left the University of Florida, it's been something that Florida's been trying to find a plug for. Jaden Hill served promisingly there through 3 weeks, but without Jadarius Perkins in the fold, leaving after Florida's week 1 loss to Utah, you're having the difficulty of finding that next man up. That's Sharif Denson, who I've said on record, I think he's going to be the next great star at that spot. I think he has all the intangibles needed to perform well in that nickel role, but you have to see it. You have to get his in-game reps, and this is an opportunity for him to do so, to grow and kind of meet that mold, meet that criteria for him to be able to be used at a more high volume when the games are coming down to the wire, when they're crucial, when it's not a Charlotte and instead it's a LSU, it's a South Carolina, it's a Kentucky, it's a Georgia, whatever. This is the opportunity for them to do that. And then Bryce Thornton in the secondary jumped Kamari Wilson in that safety rotation this week. So I expect Bryce to be someone that you see more consistently with Jordan Castell, Miguel Mitchell, RJ Moten. He's going to be that fourth man in the safety rotation. Simply put, that's a long way of me saying a lot of young pieces are going to see the field this week. A lot of young pieces, a lot of freshmen, a lot of redshirt freshmen that I didn't mention will have an abundant role on Saturday night, and they could be vital. They will be vital for how Florida performs throughout the rest of the year. You saw the effects of the lack of depth a little bit towards the end of the contest against Kentucky, but Florida was able to ultimately prevail. I think that they'll need to employ some of those younger pieces more as the year rolls on against the teams that, and especially when Florida's in tighter games. Florida kind of blew that one open early, gave them a bit of a cushion to kind of stomach the punches that Tennessee threw when it came time for them to try to go down and score and come back. This provides them a valuable test run to accelerate that process for some of those depth pieces, some of those young pieces that can work their way into the starting lineup. And number 3, we're just going to keep beating the drum, baby. Beat the drum. Clean special teams play. Yep, time to spin that broken record again. Special teams. Y'all know my thoughts on this aspect of Florida's game very well at this point. If you haven't, it's bad. I'm pessimistic for its turnaround this year. But this contest, it's not calling for it to be great. It's not calling for it to be good. It's really not even calling for it to be above average. It's not. In reality, if Florida is able to produce just a middling special teams performance, one that just is middle of the pack, it's nothing special, but it's nothing significantly harmful, then it will be an improvement from the first 3 weeks of the 2023 season. Despite their proclaimed name for it, the unit doesn't need to be a game changer this week. It needs to do the opposite. At this point in the season, it just needs to be steady. Play clean, avoid the mistakes that have hurt this team on multiple occasions or really open it up to hurt this team through 3 weeks, through 3 games. If they can do that, that will be an immense step forward for this unit. They can't have the missed or blocked extra points, the shanked punts, the high snaps, the missed field goals. They can't happen. Now, there is an open place kicking competition going on this week between the usual starter Adam Mahalik and Trey Smack. Mahalik is 4 of 5 on extra points this year, getting his first one blocked last week, or his first miss blocked last week. Against Tennessee to be his second miss of the game after missing a 42-yard field goal attempt that could have put Florida up early, 3-0 after their first drive stalled. And he's 1 of 3 on field goal attempts this season. He's just proven to be inconsistent at best, was benched against Tennessee. And the balls that he's kicking, that he's sending out there, they just are low line drives. They went into the hands of the Tennessee defenders. And that poor play really led Florida to replacing him with Trey Smack for the remainder of the contest. And Trey Smack took advantage of that opportunity, knocked through both of his extra point attempts, hit a 27-yarder to really be that exclamation point on Florida's SEC, the monumental win over Tennessee, their first SEC win of the season, first since they took down South Carolina last year in the Swamp 38-6. And I think because if Smack is the one that kind of sees that role moving forward, they will be improved. It was a notable improvement last week, especially from a consistency standpoint. I think that came for one reason, really, and it's just the trajectory of the ball off the foot of these guys. They're drastically different. And like I said, Mihailik's are low, line driving, kind of they ascend throughout the kick, whereas he can get range, that's fine. But there's always a possibility of him hitting it wrong and it coming in and being able to get a fingertip on it like the Vols did twice in his 2 kicks last week. And then you look at Smack, who I've noticed he kicks everything at 100% no matter where he's at on the field. So there might be some times where his kicks waver in terms of accuracy, but he does a good job of getting underneath the ball, creating nice height on it, coming off very consistently, and it rises quickly compared to coming out and kind of ascending as the ball flies in flight. And if he was at Georgia, if he was at the reigning national champions, the 2-time national champion program, he would be the starter if it was between these two. Because that's how a kick competition is decided under Kirby Smart. Because analytics tell him that the most important stat for kickers is the height when the ball on the ball a second or two after the ball comes off his foot. How high they can get it off the ground so that it can't get blocked by any of the defensive linemen, the block team. It's a meticulous, nitpicky approach, but it's the reason Kirby Smart is the best coach in college football as of September 22nd, 2023. And that's probably not going to change for a while. My intel of how this battle has gone, added with my pure gut feeling, tells me that Smack is going to be the one who trots on for Florida's field goal and extra point attempts for the rest of the year, barring anything unexpected or his struggles, and they just start going back and forth between two different guys. And while that ordeal is the main focus, that's the one thing that you really have to look at when watching special teams this week. There's also the necessity for the punt unit to play clean. Can't have any shanked punts. You're likely going to ask for more than a 40-yard average per from Jeremy Crawshaw. That'll suffice this week and potentially moving forward. You just can't have the shanks, the 23-yarders that have appeared in the past. The coverage and return units have been fine. They haven't been game-changing, but that's like I said earlier, they don't need to be. They need to be the opposite. They just need to not change the game at all. If they can just sustain what they've done through 2 weeks, those units will be fine. But in reality, if Florida can just escape this contest without any notable mistakes, it'll be a successful day on special teams. It boils down to being consistent. And Billy Napier talked about it from a team-wide perspective. They want to maintain momentum and be consistent this week. I think the special teams unit embodies that message because that's what they need to do as well. Ultimately, play mistake-free, procedural, mistake-free football. Charlotte allows for that. Florida just needs to execute it. Now it's time for the prediction of this Florida-Charlotte matchup in the Swamp on Saturday night. I think Florida finds success against this Charlotte squad. Like I said earlier, shouldn't really be close. Even without the 3 starters up front, I see the Gators continuing to operate within their identity offensively, finding a groove on the ground, and then opening up with the pass later in the game, later in drives, giving Graham Mertz an opportunity to be a complement to what the goal is offensively under Billy Napier. And then on the flip side, they halt the 49ers ground attack and produce another lopsided victory. I'm picking Florida to pick up its 3rd straight win, the first 3-game win streak since 2020, I might add, with a 45-6 win over Biff Poggi's squad in the Swamp. They may start slow, just coming off an emotional high of their upset win over Tennessee, but the Gators will rush for over 250 yards. They'll come away with 3 or more sacks, and they'll roll over Charlotte to put itself on the highest pedestal it's seen under Billy Napier and co. heading in to that Week 5 bout against Kentucky next Saturday. So thank you for watching another episode of Carroll's Cadence. I hope you enjoyed the format of today's show. I gave you a little scouting report of what Charlotte should look like against the Gators on Saturday night, as well as 3 things to watch from Florida's unit this weekend, with 3 offensive line missing, some young pieces ready to kind of see increased roles, and a special teams unit gasping for air at this point in the season. I'll be back on Monday with the game recap and preliminary look toward Kentucky in the afternoon on Monday. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your score prediction for the matchup in the comments down below. Signing off from Carroll's Cadence, I'm Brandon Carroll. Have a great weekend, my people.